The text came through at 9:52 at night. 14 words. Don't come tomorrow. It's too much trouble right now. We need space. I read it 4 times, standing in my kitchen with a birthday card already signed and sealed. 24 hours later, I was sitting in a parked truck outside my daughter-in-law's apartment building, holding a wrapped present nobody wanted, and a man I had never met was calling my phone to say, "Mr. Brennan, you need to come inside." I didn't know yet that those 6 words would be the last normal thing that happened to me for 2 weeks. My name is Harold Brennan. Everyone calls me Hal. I'm 66 years old. I spent 37 years as a licensed electrician in Peoria, Illinois, wiring warehouses off Farmington Road and half the houses in the Sommer Park neighborhood. I believed, right up until that Thursday in July, that if you kept showing up for your family, kept your word, and kept your mouth shut about the things that bothered you, love would take care of the rest. I was wrong about that. Not about the showing up. About the rest. My wife Margaret passed almost 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone in 4 months. 36 years of marriage ended in a hospice room with a box fan running because she liked the white noise. I won't dwell on that because this isn't really her story. But you should know that losing her rearranged everything in me. I had 1 son left in this world who mattered to me the way she had. Ethan. Ethan is 33. Quiet, always eager to keep the peace, which I used to think was a virtue in him until I learned it can also be a weakness. He transferred to a claims office in Wichita 3 years ago for a promotion. He married Vanessa Cole a year after that. She was polished, quick with a compliment, good at making a room feel warmer just by walking into it. Margaret would have said she was a lot of shine for not much substance. Margaret said things like that about people before she knew them, and sometimes she was wrong. This time she wasn't. They had my grandson Mason 2 years ago this fall. For the first year, I drove to Wichita almost every month. Then, about 1.5 years ago, something started to shift. Small things first. Calls that went to voicemail. Visits that got canceled the week before, then the day before. My sister told me over coffee, "Hal, when a young wife starts controlling when a grandfather sees his own grandson, that's not about scheduling. That's about power." 6 months later, I was sitting in that parked truck outside apartment 214, and a stranger's voice was telling me to come inside, right now. Let me back up to that Thursday, because none of this makes sense unless you understand where I was standing before that phone rang. Mason's birthday party had been set for Saturday, but I'd asked Ethan 2 weeks earlier if I could come down early, just the 2 of us, before the party got loud with cousins from Vanessa's side. Ethan said, "Sure, Dad. Come Thursday, we'll grill something." I bought Mason a hand-painted wooden fire truck from a shop downtown. $38, the kind of toy that doesn't need batteries and doesn't break. I wrapped it badly, the way a man who spent his life around conduit and breaker boxes wraps things. I packed an overnight bag because Ethan said I could stay in the guest room. I left Peoria at 10 in the morning. Stopped once for gas and a Diet Coke. Pulled into the Ridgeline Apartments on East Kellogg right around 2:30 that afternoon. 94 degrees, according to the bank sign across the street. I remember sitting in my truck a second, looking at that wrapped truck on the passenger seat, feeling that particular kind of happy that comes before you see a face that lights up when it sees yours. My phone buzzed at 2:41. "Vanessa, don't come today. Ethan's not feeling well, and honestly, Hal, it's too much trouble right now. We need some space as a family." Hal. Not Dad. Not even a joke name. Just Hal. Like I was a delivery driver. I sat there with the engine running and the AC blowing, and I read it maybe 4 times. Same as I'd read the one the night before. Then I did something I'm not proud of, and I won't pretend otherwise. I didn't drive away. I put the truck in park in a visitor spot, and I sat. It wasn't stubbornness. Not entirely. Something in the wording bothered me. Too much trouble. Not Mason's contagious, not we're swamped, like I was a burden being weighed against something else. And Ethan, not feeling well, when 2 days earlier he'd texted me a photo of Mason eating watermelon on their balcony, both of them grinning, looking fine. So I sat in that parking lot for 35 minutes. I didn't know it yet, but that was the smartest thing I did all day, because at 3:17 p.m., a man I had never met called my cell phone. "Mr. Brennan, this is Perry Aldenberg. I manage this property. I need you to come inside." My whole chest went cold, the way it does when you know before you know. "Is my son all right?" There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause a decent man gives you before he says something he wishes he didn't have to. I think you should just come up, sir. Apartment 214. I'll meet you at the door. If you're just settling in with us, hit that subscribe button now, because this story only gets heavier before it gets better. And what waited behind that door was worse than anything I'd imagined on the walk up those stairs. Perry Aldenberg met me at the door of 214 with a master key already in his hand, and a look that told me he'd rehearsed what he was about to say, and still didn't want to say it. Sir, before we go in, we got a welfare call from your neighbor down the hall 3 days ago. Said she hadn't seen your son leave for work, hadn't heard the baby, and the mail was piling up. We knocked twice. By law I can't force entry without a police check or authorization from someone on the lease. That's you. I've been trying every number I had for you since Monday. I hadn't gotten a single call. I checked later. Every attempt Perry made had gone to a number that rang twice and disconnected. Which told me, once I understood the whole picture, that somebody had been screening what reached me. And I don't mean the property manager. He opened the door. The apartment was dark, blinds drawn in the middle of the afternoon, and it smelled the way a place smells when nobody's opened a window in days. I called out for Ethan. Nothing. I called for Mason, and that silence was worse than any sound could have been. I found my son on the bathroom floor, conscious but barely, curled against the tub in a shirt soaked through with sweat. An empty insulin pen lay on the tile beside him. Ethan was diagnosed type 1 at 17. He manages it well, always has. But a man alone for 3 days, unable to reach his supplies because, as I learned within the hour, his glucose meter and backup insulin had been packed into a suitcase that wasn't his, sitting by the front door, ready to go somewhere he didn't know about. I got down on that bathroom floor, with my son the way I hadn't held him since he was small enough to carry on my shoulders at the county fair. I called 911 with a hand that would not stop shaking. The paramedic, a woman named Ochoa, looked at me after they'd gotten a line into him and some color back into his face and said, "Sir, if this had gone another 12 hours, we'd be having a very different conversation." I want you to sit with that phrase the way I had to. And Mason, my grandson, was not in that apartment. Not with Ethan. Nowhere. I asked Perry Aldenberg where the boy was. He said he'd only seen Vanessa's car in the lot once in 4 days, and that the neighbor down the hall had mentioned seeing Vanessa loading a rented SUV over the weekend. A stroller, boxes, suitcases, while Ethan, through the thin apartment wall, had been asking her in a raised voice where she thought she was taking their son. I have run a business, buried a wife, and built a life out of staying calm under pressure. That afternoon, for the first time since Margaret's funeral, I did not feel calm. I felt like the floor of the world had opened underneath me. Because somewhere out there, my grandson was gone, and I had no idea if his mother had simply left, or taken him somewhere I would never find him. They admitted Ethan to St. Vincent's, the same hospital where Mason had been born. By 7 that evening, his numbers had stabilized enough for the doctor, a young man named Dr. Okafor, to tell me he'd be all right. Fluids, monitoring overnight, but the danger had passed. I sat in a plastic chair beside that hospital bed and watched my son sleep. Somewhere around 9, he woke up enough to focus his eyes on me and say 4 words that told me everything I needed to know about what the last several months had actually been. "Dad." She took him. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that chair until the sun came up, and somewhere around midnight, I called the one person in this world I trusted to help me think clearly when I couldn't do it myself. Ray Doucette and I have known each other since 1989, back when he was still a Peoria PD detective and I was rewiring the station house on a city contract. Ray retired 9 years ago, but he never really stopped being a cop, the way some men never stop being what they spent 30 years becoming. I called him at 12:20 a.m. and told him everything. The canceled visit, the landlord's call, the 3-day welfare check, my son on that bathroom floor, my grandson nowhere to be found. Ray was quiet for a long moment, the way he used to get quiet right before he told you something you needed to hear, whether you wanted to or not. "Hal," he said, "this didn't happen in 3 days. Something's been building for months. You said the visits started getting cut back 1.5 years ago. That's when it started. Whatever this is, she's been laying groundwork a long time. I want you to do something for me before you do anything else. Don't confront anybody. Don't post anything. Don't call her family. Don't do a single thing that tips your hand. You get your son stable, and you let me start pulling threads quietly. Can you do that?" I told him I could, though every instinct in my body wanted to drive straight to wherever Vanessa Cole was and demand to know where my grandson had gone. But 37 years in business had taught me the same lesson Ray was teaching me now. The man who reacts first loses. The man who gathers everything first wins. By 9 the next morning, with Ethan resting and a nurse named Delacruz promising to call the second anything changed, Ray was already at the Ridgeline Apartments talking to Perry Aldenberg, and more importantly, to the neighbor down the hall. Her name was Odessa Farrow. She was 69 years old, and before this story is over, I'm going to tell you exactly what she did, because without her, I don't know that I'd still have a son. But that Friday morning, all I knew was this. Whatever Odessa had seen through that shared wall for the past 6 months was about to change the shape of everything I thought I understood about my daughter-in-law. Odessa Farrow had lived in apartment 216 for 9 years. A retired school cafeteria worker, she'd watched Mason grow from a car seat carried up the stairs to a little boy who waved at her through the courtyard fence every single morning. She told Ray, and later told me herself over coffee at her kitchen table, that over the past 6 months she'd watched something curdle next door. Raised voices late at night. Vanessa leaving for hours at a time, sometimes overnight, with Mason in tow. No explanation offered to anyone. Ethan looking thinner, quieter, sometimes with the blinds drawn in the middle of the day, like a man who didn't want anyone seeing in. I called that boy's father 3 times in the last 2 months, Odessa told me, her hand resting flat on the table, like she was steadying herself even in the retelling. Every time it went to a number that wasn't working right. I didn't know it then. I know now, somebody didn't want that call getting through. That single detail became the thread Ray pulled hardest on, because it meant this wasn't chaos. It was engineered. Ray spent 4 days working through what he still had access to as a retired officer with contacts who owed him favors, plus what any determined man with a laptop and a library card can find if he knows where to look. What he laid out on my kitchen table back in Peoria on a Saturday afternoon, while Ethan slept upstairs in his childhood bedroom, changed everything. Vanessa had lost her job as a marketing coordinator 14 months earlier. She never told Ethan. For over a year, she had been leaving the apartment every weekday morning dressed for an office that no longer employed her, spending her days at a coffee shop across town, collecting unemployment under a different mailing address. A P.O. box rented 3 towns over, so the paperwork wouldn't show up at their apartment. Ethan had been giving her half his paycheck every 2 weeks for what he believed was their household budget. Rent, groceries, Mason's daycare. Ray's research, cross-referenced against bank statements Ethan eventually authorized me to help him pull, showed that roughly $26,000 over 14 months had gone somewhere other than the household. Some of it went to credit cards Ethan didn't know existed. Cards that had funded regular weekend trips to Dallas. Trips Vanessa told Ethan were girls' trips with co-workers. Except the company had let her go over a year earlier. Those co-workers didn't exist anymore. The Dallas trips, it turned out, were to see a man named Derek Solano, someone Vanessa had known before she ever met my son. Ray traced the connection through phone records Ethan still had legal access to as a joint account holder. And that suitcase by the front door, the one packed with Ethan's diabetic supplies mixed in among Mason's clothes? Vanessa had been planning to leave for Dallas permanently. Not with Ethan's blessing. Not with a custody agreement. With Mason. On a Sunday. While Ethan was recovering, or not recovering, from whatever happened after she'd deliberately delayed calling anyone when she found him in distress that Thursday night, choosing instead to load the car and leave him there. I want to be careful here, because I know how a story like this can tip into something that sounds too calculated to be believed. But Ray found the receipts. Literally receipts. A U-Haul reservation for a one-way trailer, picked up that Saturday morning, the very morning Mason's birthday party had been planned. Destination, Frisco, Texas. A lease application already submitted under Vanessa's name alone, for a 2-bedroom apartment 9 minutes from Derek Solano's address. And an email, printed and placed in the folder Ray handed me, sent from Vanessa's account to her sister 9 days before I ever got that text canceling my visit. Once I'm out of Wichita, this is going to be so much cleaner. Ethan will fight for a while, but he'll get tired. His dad is the only real problem. He won't let this go easy. So I need him out of the picture until we're already gone. I need him out of the picture. That was me. 14 words in a text message calling me too much trouble were never really about a Thursday afternoon visit. They were about making sure the one person paying close attention wasn't standing in the room when the walls came down. Here's where I want to pause and tell you something, because right up until Ray showed me those printouts, some small, stubborn part of me was still holding out hope this was a misunderstanding. That Vanessa was overwhelmed, maybe going through something private, and I'd overreacted. I think most of us hold on to that hope longer than we should, because the alternative is admitting someone you welcomed into your family, someone you drove hours to see, was capable of watching your son suffer and calculating whether it was convenient to help him. That hope ended the moment I read that email. Ethan read it too, sitting at my kitchen table in Peoria, 8 days after I found him on that bathroom floor, color back in his face, blood sugar stable, a folder of his wife's betrayal spread out in front of him like a verdict. He didn't cry. Not right away. He sat very still, the way I remember sitting still the day the doctor told us about Margaret's diagnosis. That particular stillness that comes right before a man's whole understanding of his life gets rewritten. She left me on that floor, he said finally, quiet, almost to himself. She was already loading the car. She heard me. Odessa heard everything through the wall. She just left. I put my hand on my son's shoulder, and I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that would make that fact smaller than it was. But I want to tell you about Mason now, because that's the part that matters most, and I don't want you sitting through this whole story worried about that little boy without an answer. Vanessa had not, in fact, taken him to Texas that Sunday. Perry Aldenberg's welfare check and my unplanned arrival had interrupted her timeline. And what happened next, the phone call to an attorney, the emergency filing, the address in a town called Sedgwick where my grandson had been kept, is what I need to tell you about right now. Working with an attorney I'd hired named Priscilla Novak out of downtown Wichita, Ray and I filed for an emergency custody order the following Monday, based on documented abandonment and endangerment. Priscilla was blunt on our first call. Mr. Brennan, judges move slowly on custody. They move fast when a father was found unconscious and a child's whereabouts are unaccounted for. We have both. I need everything Ray found organized tonight. The court granted Ethan temporary sole physical custody within 72 hours, expedited because of the medical emergency and Odessa Farrow's sworn statement about what she'd witnessed through that shared wall. Mason, it turned out, had been staying with Vanessa's sister in a town called Sedgwick the entire time. Safe, federal cared for, but deliberately kept away from his father while the exit plan finished forming. I want to tell you what those 72 hours felt like, because I don't think I've been honest yet about the fear underneath all of it. Every night, lying awake in my own house, I kept doing the math. If Perry Aldenberg's welfare check had come 1 day later, if I had turned that truck around in the parking lot instead of sitting there 40 extra minutes, if Odessa Farrow had decided it wasn't her business to keep calling a number that wouldn't connect. There is a version of this story where nobody finds Ethan in time. There is a version where the U-Haul leaves Saturday morning with my grandson in the back seat, and none of us ever get the chance to stop it. I have to live with knowing how close that version came to being the only one that happened. I drove to Sedgwick myself the day the order came through, Priscilla's paralegal beside me with the paperwork in a folder on her lap. My hands were steady on the wheel the whole way there, which surprised me, because nothing else in me felt steady. We pulled up to a small rental house with a chain-link fence and a plastic slide in the front yard. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the grass needed mowing. I remember Priscilla's paralegal knocking twice, and a woman I'd never met, Vanessa's sister, opening the door with a look on her face that told me she already knew why we'd come. And behind her, in the front hallway, small and round-faced, and missing his front tooth from where he'd fallen off Ethan's shoulders that spring, stood my grandson. He looked up at me the way a child looks at something he wasn't sure was allowed to be real yet. "Grandpa," he said, "did you bring the truck?" I had. It was still in my own truck, still wrapped in that badly folded paper, exactly where I'd left it the day everything changed. And in about 10 seconds, I was going to have to decide whether to let myself feel what I'd been holding back for 8 straight days, or whether to stay steady 1 more hour, until my grandson was somewhere safe enough for me to finally fall apart. I knelt down right there on the porch steps and I held that boy, and I cried, and I didn't care who saw it. 8 days of holding steady came out of me all at once, on a stranger's front porch in a town I'd never been to before that morning. Mason didn't understand any of it. He just patted my shoulder the way small children do when a grown-up is upset and they don't know why, and said, "It's okay, Grandpa," like he was the one comforting me. Which, in a way, he was. I gave him the wooden truck right there in that driveway. He turned it over in his hands like it was the most important object in the world, and for about 30 seconds, none of the rest of it mattered. Not the custody filing in the folder on the paralegal's lap. Not the folder Ray had built on my kitchen table. Not the empty insulin pen still sitting somewhere in an evidence bag at St. Vincent's. Just a boy, a truck, and a driveway. Vanessa's sister stood in the doorway the whole time, arms crossed, saying nothing. I didn't blame her, not entirely. Family loyalty pulls people into things they didn't choose. But before we left, she said one thing I've thought about since. She told me you were the problem, that you couldn't let go of your son, that you made things harder than they needed to be. She looked down at Mason, still clutching that truck. I should have asked more questions. I didn't say anything back. There wasn't a version of that conversation that would have helped either of us in that moment. I just buckled Mason into the paralegal's back seat, checked the straps twice the way I used to when Ethan was small, and drove back toward Wichita with my grandson singing along, off-key, to a song on the radio he didn't know the words to. Ethan was still at my house recovering when we pulled in. I will never forget his face when that front door opened and Mason ran across the yard yelling, "Daddy," at the top of his lungs, like the last 8 days hadn't rearranged both their lives permanently. Ethan went down on one knee in the grass and just held him. Didn't say a word for almost a full minute. I stood on the porch and let them have that, because some moments aren't meant to have anyone else standing in the middle of them, not even the man who drove 3 hours and sat 40 extra minutes in a parking lot to make that moment possible. But the story wasn't finished. There was still a custody hearing coming, a woman named Vanessa Cole, who didn't yet know how much Ray had found, and one more person I hadn't properly thanked yet, a 69-year-old woman named Odessa Farrow, whose stubbornness with a broken phone number was the only reason any of us were standing in that yard at all. I asked Odessa Farrow weeks later, over coffee at her kitchen table, why she'd gone to that much trouble for a neighbor she wasn't even close friends with. 3 failed calls to a number that wouldn't connect. A 4th trip, on foot, down to the leasing office, refusing to leave until Perry Aldenberg promised her he'd force the issue. She looked at me like the question surprised her. "Because that's what you do," she said. "You don't wait for it to be somebody else's job." I sat with that answer longer than she probably expected me to. In 37 years running a business, I'd met plenty of people who talked about doing the right thing. Odessa Farrow was one of maybe 5 in my whole life who actually did it when nobody was watching and nothing in it for her. I paid off the remaining balance on her car loan without telling her I was going to do it. Found it through her credit union, called them directly, settled it in full, $940. When she called me in tears asking why, I told her the truth. "You gave my son his life back. The least I can give you is one less bill." I also set up a scholarship in Margaret's name at the community college where Odessa's granddaughter was starting nursing school that fall. $2,000 a semester, for as long as the girl stayed enrolled. Some debts you can't repay with money, but you can at least try. And trying, it turns out, matters more than people think. While all of that was settling into place, Priscilla Novak was building the custody case that would decide the rest of Mason's childhood. She laid it all out for me the week before the hearing, spreading the folder across her desk like a map of everything Vanessa had spent 14 months hiding. "Mr. Brennan, I've tried cases with less than 1/10 of this," she said. "The unemployment fraud alone would raise questions. The hidden accounts, the Dallas trips, Mrs. Farrow's sworn statement about the night your son collapsed, and that email. A judge doesn't need me to explain that email. It explains itself." I asked her the only question that mattered to me. "Will Mason be safe with his father?" She didn't hesitate. "After what I'm about to present, I don't think the judge is going to have any doubt about that at all." I believed her. But belief and certainty are 2 different things, and the hearing was still 5 days away. 5 days in which Vanessa Cole, according to Ray's last update, had started making calls of her own, and had hired a lawyer with a reputation for making these fights ugly and slow. Whatever was coming in that courtroom, I had a feeling it wasn't going to be the quiet, clean ending any of us were hoping for. The hearing was not close. Priscilla Novak walked the courtroom through the financial records first. 14 months of unemployment fraud. The hidden P.O. box. The credit cards Ethan never knew existed. Then the phone records tracing the Dallas trips back to Derek Solano, a relationship that predated the marriage and never actually ended. Then Odessa Farrow's sworn statement, read into the record in her own steady, unhurried words about raised voices through a shared wall, about a little boy she watched grow up through a courtyard fence, about 3 phone calls to a number that had been quietly disconnected from receiving them. And then the email. Priscilla read it slowly, letting every word land. I need him out of the picture until we're already gone. I watched the judge's face when she got to that line. It didn't move much. It didn't need to. Vanessa's attorney tried to argue that Ethan's diabetes management was the real issue, that a man who couldn't keep his own blood sugar stable wasn't fit to parent alone. It was the only card he had left, and it was a bad one. Priscilla had anticipated it. She produced 15 years of Ethan's medical records showing consistent, responsible management, right up until the week his insulin and glucose meter were packed into a suitcase that wasn't his and placed by a front door he didn't put it there. The judge granted Ethan primary custody. Supervised visitation only for Vanessa, contingent on completed financial counseling and a psychological evaluation. I felt something in my chest ease for the first time in 3 weeks. Not triumph, exactly. I want to be honest about that. I take no pleasure in watching a young woman's life come apart in a courtroom, even one who did what she did. But I also don't apologize for it, because a 4-year-old boy needed somebody in that room telling the truth on his behalf, and I was glad it was us. Vanessa moved to Frisco with Derek Solano 3 weeks after the hearing. As far as I know, she sees Mason 4 days a month, always supervised, always through a court-appointed facilitator, because the judge did not take lightly a mother who packed a suitcase and left a diabetic man semi-conscious on a bathroom floor rather than delay a moving timeline. Ethan moved back to Peoria that October. Not into my house, he wanted his own place, and I respected that, but into a 2-bedroom rental 11 minutes from mine. Close enough that Mason could ride his bike to my driveway once he was old enough. Close enough that Sunday dinners stopped being something we scheduled around excuses. His insurance company let him transfer back to the Peoria branch without missing a step, which tells you something about the kind of employee my son has always been. Even during the year, he was quietly falling apart at home and nobody at that office ever knew. I asked him once, months later, whether he regretted marrying Vanessa in the first place. Whether if he could go back, he'd have seen it coming. He thought about it a long time before he answered me, longer than I expected. I don't think I could have seen all of it, Ethan said finally. But I think somewhere in me, I knew something was wrong. I kept telling myself it was normal marriage stuff, because I didn't want to be the kind of man who gives up. I think that's what she was counting on, that I'd rather be miserable than admit I was wrong. I told him that's not weakness. That's just what love does to good men sometimes. It makes them patient with things that don't deserve patience. And then I told him what I'd learned from watching him on that hospital bed. What I think is maybe the truest thing I've figured out in 66 years on this earth. Love isn't proven by how much trouble you're willing to put up with from someone. It's proven by who shows up when the trouble finally arrives, and who's already halfway out the door with the car loaded before anybody asks them to help. I think about that text sometimes. Too much trouble. 14 words meant to keep me 3 hours away on a Thursday afternoon, so nobody would notice the exit already in motion. I think about how close it came to working. How, if I'd simply turned that truck around in the parking lot the way any reasonable, hurt man might have, the story ends very differently. I don't let myself finish that thought all the way through. I don't have to. It didn't end that way. I sat in that parking lot 35 extra minutes because something in my gut told me the wording was wrong. And Perry Aldenberg's number came through at 3:17 in the afternoon. And my son is alive. And my grandson rides his bike down my street most weekends now, training wheels getting looser every month, which Ethan says means we'll need to take them off soon. Mason turned 5 this past October. We had the party at my house this time, backyard, string lights along the fence the way Margaret always liked them for birthdays. Odessa Farrow drove up for it, nearly 3 hours each way because I asked her to, and because, as she put it, I wasn't about to miss the party I helped make happen. Ethan grilled burgers. My sister brought a sheet cake from the bakery Margaret used to love. Mason ran around that yard in a paper birthday crown until 9 o'clock at night. And at one point, he climbed up into my lap on the porch swing, sticky with frosting, and fell asleep there the way small children do when they've finally run themselves all the way out. I sat on that swing a long time after everyone else had gone quiet. My grandson's weight settled against my chest, the porch light throwing a soft yellow glow across the yard. And I thought about a parking lot in Wichita, and a text message calling me too much trouble. And I thought, if that's what I am to the people who wanted me gone, then I hope I stay exactly that kind of trouble for every single day I've got left in me. Because trouble like that, it turns out, is just another word for love that refuses to look away. I think about Perry Aldenberg sometimes, a stranger who could have decided it wasn't his problem, and instead spent 3 days trying every number he had until one of them finally rang through to a man sitting in a parking lot with a wrapped present on the passenger seat. I think about Odessa Farrow, 69 years old, who called a broken number 4 times and then walked down to a leasing office herself rather than let it go. I think about Ray Doucette, who told me not to react, and by telling me that, probably saved my grandson from a life spent wondering why his grandfather wasn't in it. None of them had to do what they did. That's the part one keep coming back to. A whole story like this one turns on people who simply refuse to look away, when looking away would have been so much easier. Ethan is different now. Not broken different, steadier different. He checks in on Sundays without me having to wonder if the call will come. He tells Mason stories about his grandmother, about the fair, about a wooden truck wrapped badly in blue paper. He's dating again, slowly, carefully, and I trust his judgment more now than I ever did before, because a man who's been through what he's been through learns to see the difference between shine and substance the hard way. Mason doesn't remember much of those 2 weeks. He was too young. What he remembers is a grandfather who showed up in a driveway with a truck in his hands. What he remembers is Sunday dinners and bike rides down a street that isn't going anywhere. I'm grateful for that every single day. Some things a child should never have to carry, and I made sure that one didn't stay with him. As for me, I still sit in my truck sometimes before I go inside somewhere, just for a minute, just to notice how a place feels before I walk into it. Margaret used to tease me for being the kind of man who trusts his gut over his eyes. I used to think that was just a habit from wiring old houses, learning to sense a bad connection before you ever saw the spark. Turns out it was the same instinct all along. It just took the right Thursday afternoon to prove it mattered. If this story reminded you of somebody in your own life who showed up when it counted, or reminded you to be that person for somebody else, that's really why I told it. If you're still here with me, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.